Welcome to Wolfe's World. Quiet, precise, and always a step ahead. Tell us where you're listening from. Liking and subscribing helps support the channel and the next case. Now, follow the clues. Nero Wolfe and the fire in Fritz'S kitchen. I carried Wolfe's tray upstairs that morning with the care of a man balancing the crown jewels on a pillow. Breakfast in bed for him was less about food than ceremony. Fritz had arranged the tray with his usual flourish: poached eggs, brioche, butter the colour of a canary's chest, and a small silver pitcher of hot chocolate. The aroma rose through the house like a soft fanfare. I nudged Wolfe's door with my shoulder, stepped inside, and found him already propped against pillows, the robe closed around his girth like a governor in full regalia. "Set it down," he said, without turning his eyes from the book on his lap. His tone was the same as when he directed a witness to speak up. I slid the tray onto the folding stand beside his bed. He adjusted his spectacles, gave a slow nod of approval, then turned the page as though the eggs and Fritz's perfection were inevitable facts of nature. That was the rhythm of our mornings. Wolfe with his breakfast, me standing guard until dismissed, Fritz hovering somewhere between pride and worry in the kitchen temple below. A system as precise as a Swiss watch, which was appropriate considering Fritz. Nothing ever went awry, unless it was my tie not knotted to his liking. I leaned against the doorframe. "Everything looks in order," I said. "Order," Wolfe murmured, swallowing a mouthful of egg, "is the basis of civilization." I was considering a retort when a faint smell intruded. It was not food. It was acrid, sharp, a whiff that didn't belong anywhere near poached eggs. I stiffened, lifted my head, and sniffed again. Wolfe frowned. "Archie, what is that?" Before I could answer, a shout rose from below. It was not a polite Swiss exclamation. It was Fritz, loud and alarmed, his voice knifing through the brownstone. "Archie, fire! In the kitchen!" I bolted upright. Wolfe slammed his book shut with a violence that made the tray rattle. His face darkened, not with fear, but with the fury of a man whose sanctum had been violated. "Go," he commanded. I didn't need encouragement. I dashed down the stairs, the smell thickening as I descended. The kitchen, usually a cathedral of copper and order, was clouded with smoke. Flames leapt along the side of the stove, licking upward toward the cupboards. The roar of burning grease filled the air. Fritz, red-faced, had seized a metal pot lid and was slamming it down over a pan that spat sparks like fireworks. "Bicarbonate!" he shouted. "Quick!" I yanked open the nearest drawer, found the tin, and tossed it to him. He flung the powder into the flames, clouds rising like a snowstorm in hell. The fire shrieked, recoiled, then flared again along the side panel where grease had run. I grabbed a heavy towel, soaked it under the tap, and slapped it against the cabinet. The hiss was loud enough to make my teeth ache. Between us, we smothered the worst of it. Smoke rolled toward the ceiling, but the flames died under Fritz's relentless assault. At last, there was only the stench of scorched oil and the sound of our breathing. I straightened, sweat slick on my forehead, and looked around. The stove's enamel was blackened, the wall behind it streaked with soot. A pan lay warped on the floor, a ruin of once polished copper. Fritz held the lid as though it were a shield that had barely saved him from a spear thrust. He muttered in Swiss German, words not found in cookbooks. Then, seeing me watching, he set his jaw. "I left the stove cold last night. I checked twice." I didn't doubt it. Fritz's kitchen was sacred ground. He polished every knob, lined every spice jar like soldiers on parade. Carelessness was not in his dictionary. I crouched near the base of the stove, scanning the floor. Amid the grease streaks and broken utensils, a scrap of cloth lay charred at the edges, blackened but still visible. I picked it up with the corner of the towel. It was a piece of white fabric, stiff with singe, not belonging to any apron Fritz used. "Recognize this?" I asked. Fritz shook his head. His eyes darted toward the door as though expecting someone to have slipped in. "Not mine," his voice cracked. I tucked the cloth in my pocket. "Then somebody's been busy." The back stair door was locked, bolts secure, windows latched. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the ash near the back stoop. The fire had started at the stove, but not from anything Fritz left burning. The burners were turned off, knobs twisted to rest. Yet flames had danced as though invited. "Good heavens," Wolfe's voice came from behind me. I turned, startled. He stood in the doorway, robe flung over his frame, face drawn with rage. He never descended before tending his orchids, yet here he was, driven by the smell and the violation. "This is intolerable," he said, his nostrils flaring. He hated disorder with the same passion other men reserved for enemies. He stepped no further, disliking soot on his slippers, but his eyes pierced the room as if he could will it clean again. "The stove was cold," Fritz said miserably. "Cold, Mr. Wolfe. This is not accident." Wolfe's gaze shifted to me. "Archie?" I drew the cloth from my pocket, held it up. "This doesn't belong here." He regarded it a moment, then gave a small grunt. "Sabotage." Fritz wrung his hands, his immaculate kitchen blackened. "Why? Who?" Wolfe turned, robe swirling, and mounted the stairs without another word. He had seen enough. Fritz looked at me, eyes pleading, but I had none of Wolfe's serenity. My heart still thumped from the battle with fire. We set about clearing the wreckage. I opened the windows, letting cool Manhattan air push the smoke upward. Outside, the city went about its business, taxis honking, vendors calling. Inside, the brownstone's rhythm had been broken. Fritz scrubbed furiously, as if elbow grease could erase insult. When the worst was cleared, I climbed back up to Wolfe's room. He sat again with his tray, untouched since the interruption. The eggs had cooled, the chocolate lost its steam. He did not complain, which told me how deeply he felt the intrusion. "Someone has made a grave mistake," he said. His voice was low, each word measured. "To strike here, in my house, against Fritz, against order. Archie, we are under assault." I nodded. "I'll start asking questions." "You will." He leaned back, closed his eyes briefly. "This was not an accident. The cloth will tell us whose hand guided it. Begin immediately." I left him then, but the sight of the ruined kitchen stayed with me. The brownstone was a fortress of habits and rules, a place where the world outside was kept at bay. That fortress had been breached, not by a bullet or a knock at the door, but by fire in Fritz's temple. Whoever lit it had chosen their battlefield well, and I intended to find them. The kitchen looked like a battlefield after retreat. Smoke still clung to the ceiling corners, a grey film that dulled the copper pots on the rack. The stove's enamel, once gleaming white, had cracked and blistered, black edges curling upward like burned paper. The air carried the acrid stench of grease fire, mixed with wet cloth from our hasty attempts to smother the flames. Fritz stood stiff as a grenadier, arms folded, his face pale beneath the soot that streaked it. I moved carefully among the wreckage, stepping over the warped pan that had crashed to the tiles. The floor was gritty underfoot, strewn with powder from the tin of bicarbonate and fragments of charred wood. Every surface bore testimony to the blaze. Cupboard doors scorched, handles warped, the linoleum scorched in jagged arcs. I bent to examine the stove more closely. The burners were cold, knobs firmly in their resting place, a fact that matched Fritz's insistence. "I checked it last night," he said, voice strained as if repeating a catechism. "Every switch, every flame. Nothing was left to chance. This was done." His accent thickened, the measured tones of his English betraying Swiss edges when shaken. "I don't doubt you," I told him. "If you say you checked, which makes the question simple. How does a cold stove decide to torch itself?" He pressed his lips tight, eyes roaming the ruin as though he had lost a child. The kitchen was not merely his workplace. It was the core of his existence here. Seeing it wounded was a blow deeper than he could admit aloud. A cough sounded behind me. Wolfe had descended again, robe still wrapped, his expression like carved basalt. He disliked exertion, but violation of his domestic routine was more intolerable than fatigue. He paused at the threshold, unwilling to tread further among ashes, and fixed his eyes on me. "Well?" he demanded. I gestured at the stove. "Cold burners, knobs off. Fritz swears he checked. I believe him." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Then someone set it." "Looks that way," I agreed. "Question is how. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks." He grunted. Displeasure made sound. "An intrusion of this magnitude within these walls cannot be borne. You will investigate." That was less instruction than decree. I gave a nod, straightened, and resumed my inspection. On hands and knees, I ducked under the counter where smoke had left a black smear. My fingers touched grit and ash. Then something caught the light, a fragment of cloth, half-scorched, trapped beneath the baseboard. I teased it free. It was stiff with soot, edges curled from flame. The weave was fine, tighter than kitchen rags, not matching Fritz's heavy linen towels. White once, it was now marred with streaks of grey and black. I held it up. Fritz shook his head instantly. Not mine, not from here. His certainty carried no hesitation. He knew every thread in this room. Wolfe's voice was measured. A relic of the hand that set this. I slipped the fragment into my pocket, already thinking of where it might lead. The detail was too distinct, too deliberate to be chance debris. Someone had left it or lost it while arranging the fire. The silence that followed was heavy. From outside, through the open window, drifted the faint hum of morning traffic on West 35th Street, indifferent to our crisis. Inside, the air reeked of smoke and humiliation. Fritz's jaw trembled as he surveyed the cabinets, each burn a scar on his pride. "You'll rebuild," I said quietly, though reassurance was poor currency. "Yes," he replied, but the word lacked conviction. Wolfe turned, already retreating up the stairs, unwilling to waste more time in ruin. "Archie," he said over his shoulder, "do not tarry. This house is my citadel. Discover who breached it." His bulk receded, leaving Fritz and me among the wreckage. I drew a slow breath, memorizing every detail. Scorch marks, broken utensils, the pattern of powder spread across tiles. Each mark told a story of hands at work, shaping chaos with purpose. I patted my pocket, the cloth fragment pressing against my fingers like a signature waiting to be read. Whoever had struck at Wolfe's household had erred. They had left behind their calling card, and I intended to collect the debt. The bell rang at 11 with a clang that rattled the vestibule glass. Fritz was still in the kitchen, muttering in Swiss as he polished scorch marks that refused to yield. I crossed the hall and opened the front door. Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop, hat jammed low, cigar clamped in his teeth though it wasn't lit. His overcoat hung half open and his expression promised no joy. "Well," he growled, "somebody said Wolfe's house nearly went up. You boys frying bacon in kerosene?" "Good morning to you too," I said, stepping aside. "Come in before the neighbours think you're here on a raid." He stomped in, shaking the cold from his shoulders. The smell of smoke clung faintly to the air despite Fritz's valiant scrubbing. Kramer sniffed, eyebrows climbing. "Smells like a diner on 3rd Avenue after a rush-hour fire." "Don't insult Fritz," I warned. "He takes pride in keeping this place fit for kings." Kramer grunted. "Then why the call? I've got 3 stick-ups and a missing heiress, and here I am about a burned pot roast." "It wasn't pot roast," I said evenly, "and it wasn't accident." He shot me a look but didn't reply. I led him into the office. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, vast and immovable, fingers tented against his chest. He had changed into his brown suit, as if dressing fully might restore dignity to the household. His eyes were dark slits of disapproval fixed on Kramer, as though the man himself had brought the flames. "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice curt. "Sit." Kramer dropped into one of the red chairs with the grace of a sack of coal. He struck a match, then remembered Wolfe's rules and growled under his breath before tucking the cigar back in his pocket. "All right," he said. "Tell me why I'm wasting time here. Fire department says it's contained, no spread, no injuries. I'd call it closed." "It is not closed," Wolfe replied, each syllable distinct. "The stove was cold. Fritz left it so. The blaze was set." Kramer barked a laugh. "Arson? Here? What's next? A jewel heist in your orchid room?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. "You trivialize what you do not grasp. This was intrusion, calculated, deliberate." I produced the fragment of cloth from my pocket, laid it on Wolfe's desk blotter. The charred edges looked sinister against the leather. "Found under the counter," I explained. "Not Fritz's, not from this kitchen." Kramer leaned forward, squinting. He poked it once with a blunt finger. "Could be from anything. Apron, rag, handkerchief." "But not Fritz's," I said, "and not left there by chance." Kramer sat back, unimpressed. "You've got soot, a burned towel, and your nerves on edge. I've got homicide cases waiting. I can't divert men because a cook feels slighted." Fritz, entering then with a tray of glasses and water, froze at the remark. His face flushed crimson. He set the tray down with unusual force. "Slighted? My kitchen nearly destroyed, and you call it slighted?" His accent was sharp enough to cut glass. Kramer shifted uncomfortably, not used to being confronted by domestic staff. "All I'm saying, friend, is accidents happen. Stoves flare, ovens misbehave. It doesn't mean some phantom slipped in to roast your cupboards." "Enough," Wolfe thundered. The word echoed, silencing the room. "You insult my household and my intelligence. Archie does not summon you on trifles. If you will not act, then at least refrain from derision." Kramer's jaw worked, chewing on pride. He glanced at me, then at the cloth again. "You really think someone set this, Goodwin?" "I do," I said. "Fritz keeps that stove like a shrine. Nothing left burning, no chance spark. Somebody wanted smoke in this house." He groaned, rubbing his forehead. "I'll leave a man on call. That's the most you're getting. If your phantom strikes again, he can ring me. But don't expect a squad car stationed outside while I've got real bodies piling up." "That will suffice," Wolfe said icily. "For now." Kramer stood, tugged his coat straight and muttered, "Domestic bonfire," under his breath. I opened the door for him. He stomped out without another word, his irritation trailing like exhaust. When I closed the door, the house seemed to breathe again, though smoke still lingered faintly in the hall. Wolfe remained motionless, eyes closed, lips pressed thin. At last he spoke. "Arson in my house, inspector's disdain. Fritz's pride wounded. It is intolerable." He opened his eyes, fixing them on me. "Archie, find the hand that struck. We will have satisfaction." I nodded, slipping the cloth fragment back into its envelope. The brownstone was no fortress if men could reach its kitchen with fire. Whoever had done it had invited war, and Wolfe was not a man to forgive trespass. The message came by way of the milkman, who stopped to tell Fritz that a fellow walking a pair of fox terriers late the previous night had mentioned seeing something unusual. By the time Fritz repeated it to me, the detail had ripened into an account worth checking. I left Wolfe in his chair with a scowl and went out into the February air, brisk enough to sting ears, and followed directions to West 36th Street where the dog walker lived. Manhattan before noon had its own rhythm, delivery trucks grinding gears, boys shouting headlines at corners, and women hurrying to grocers with lists in hand. The service alley behind our brownstone still bore soot at its edge, a reminder of the flare that nearly took Fritz's kitchen. The man in question was named Vernon Tuttle, middle-aged, with thinning hair and an overcoat that had seen too many winters. He answered the knock with his 2 terriers straining at the leash, eyes darting nervously as though I'd come to cite him for jaywalking. When I introduced myself, he nodded and agreed to talk, though he looked as though any conversation might cost him money he didn't have. We walked the dogs together along the block. The animals nosed at lampposts while I kept my tone casual. "I hear you saw someone near the brownstone last night. About midnight?" Tuttle cleared his throat, gaze fixed on the sidewalk. "Might have been. Hard to say. Shadows play tricks, mister." "Shadows don't leave footprints," I said mildly. "You're certain you saw a person?" He hesitated, then gave a grudging nod. "A figure, yes. Moving quick down the service alley toward 9th Avenue. Dark coat, maybe a hat. I was at the corner with the dogs." I studied him. "Tall, short, heavy, thin?" "Couldn't swear. Average, I'd say." He avoided my eyes. Didn't stop to chat. His vagueness struck me harder than certainty would have. Either he feared involvement or he was trimming the truth. "Did the figure carry anything? A bag? A parcel?" "No, nothing like that." His voice cracked on the denial. The dogs tugged, and he used the distraction to bend, fussing with a leash buckle that needed no adjusting. We rounded the corner. Streetcars rattled past, sparks flashing under their wheels. I pressed again, softening my tone. "Look, Mr. Tuttle, this matters. My employer's house was tampered with. You don't want to hold back if you saw more." He swallowed hard, face pinched. "All I know is what I told you. A figure, gone quick. Might have been anyone. Might have been nothing." I let it rest, though my suspicion grew. Either the man feared reprisal or he had been warned to stay quiet. We finished the walk in silence. At his stoop he muttered, "Hope that helps," and retreated inside before I could reply. Back at the brownstone, I reported in Wolfe's office. He listened with eyes half closed, lips pressed together. The fragment of cloth lay on his desk where I had placed it earlier, its charred edge like a black wound against the blotter. Too vague, I concluded. He described a man, but barely. Coat, hat, no details. Could be deliberate fog. Deliberate indeed, Wolfe murmured. The essence of mendacity is inexactitude. He saw more than he admits. Fritz stood near the globe, arms crossed, face pale. The soot had been scrubbed from his skin, but humiliation clung like smoke. "Why my kitchen?" he demanded suddenly. "Why there? If they wish to insult Mr. Wolfe, they can throw stones at windows. But to strike at me, this is personal." His voice carried more anguish than anger, and I felt a pang. The man had dedicated his life to feeding Wolfe's stomach and pride. To have his domain attacked was an insult deeper than theft. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "Not random vandalism, Fritz. A man risking midnight trespass does so with intention. He sought to wound this house where it is vulnerable, its heart, which is your kitchen." He lifted the cloth fragment between thick fingers. "The act is malice directed, not accident. They meant you to feel it." Fritz drew a breath as though steadying himself, then spoke low. "Then it is me they hate, not the brownstone. Someone holds grudge against me." "Perhaps," Wolfe said, "or they understand that injuring you injures me. Either way, we are engaged." I leaned against the cabinet, studying both men. The smell of smoke lingered faintly despite Fritz's efforts, a reminder that the enemy had already been inside. "So," I said, "we're not hunting vandals looking for mischief. We're hunting somebody with a score to settle. Fritz may know more than he thinks." Fritz shook his head, but his eyes slid away. Wolfe caught it instantly. "Archie will pursue the neighbour further," he said. "Meanwhile, Fritz, you will reflect. Whoever struck at you has measured your pride. They have erred gravely. I will not abide it." The silence that followed was heavy with Wolfe's determination. Outside, horns blared as traffic built toward midday. Inside, the brownstone had shifted from shock to resolve. We had a witness, unreliable though he was, and we had Wolfe's certainty. The kitchen fire was no accident. It was the opening shot of something larger, and Wolfe had taken the challenge. I took Fritz aside that evening while Wolfe was upstairs tending his orchids. The kitchen still bore scars of the blaze, faint scorch lines like battle wounds that no scrubbing could erase. Fritz stood at the counter polishing a knife that was already shining, his motions tight with distraction. I leaned against the doorway and kept my tone casual, though nothing about the situation felt light. "Fritz," I said, "you've been carrying a face like a funeral since the fire. Wolfe thinks someone meant to strike at the house. You seem to think it was meant for you. Suppose you tell me why." He froze, blade catching the lamp glow. "Archie, there are matters of pride. They do not concern you." "That's where you're wrong," I told him. "Anything that brings flames into this kitchen concerns me plenty. Start talking." He sighed, set down the knife and rubbed his forehead. His accent thickened. "There is a man, Emil Gerber. We are both Swiss. Once we were friends." The name meant nothing to me, though it carried weight on Fritz's tongue. I waited. "He owns a restaurant on 8th Avenue, Fritz continued slowly. "He boasts much of his skill. We argued years ago about a dish, one recipe handed from a master in Zurich. He demanded it from me for his book. I refused. He has never forgiven." "Hold on," I said. "You two nearly come to blows over a cookbook recipe?" Fritz's eyes flashed. "Not merely cookbook. It is heritage. A preparation for venison in red wine. Delicate balance, handed with trust. To give it away for his profit? Never." I raised a brow. "And you think Gerber might decide to even the score by sneaking into our alley and setting fire to your stove?" Fritz spread his hands helplessly. "He is proud, vindictive. He has mocked me before in public." The image of a rival chef slipping through shadows with a can of kerosene struck me as comic, but I didn't laugh. Wolfe would call it motive enough, yet I sensed Fritz still held something back. His gaze avoided mine, fixed on the knife gleaming on the counter. I leaned closer. "You're not giving me the whole portion. What else ties you and Gerber?" He pressed his lips tight, then shook his head. "No more, please." I straightened, considering. "You know Wolfe won't leave it there. He'll dig. Better it comes from you than from someone else." He didn't answer. His silence was louder than speech. Later in the office, Wolfe sat waiting with beer foaming gently in his glass. He listened without interruption as I relayed Fritz's story. When I finished, Wolfe's fingers drummed against the chair arm. "Gerber," he repeated. "I know of him. A heavy hand with sauces, a vulgarian in presentation. Yes, this bears the odour of spite." He might have wanted to rattle Fritz, I agreed. But to risk arson? That's bold even for bruised pride. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then opened with slow certainty. The distinction is immaterial. Pride provokes extremes. You will visit Gerber's establishment, observe, question. If he is our incendiary, he will betray himself. I nodded. "And Fritz?" "Fritz will reflect further," Wolfe said, his tone final. "He withholds. You sensed it. So did I. He must confront it, for his own sake and for ours. Press him, Archie. Do not relent." I left Wolfe to his beer, thinking about the quiet pain in Fritz's voice. Rivalry over a recipe seemed thin fuel for arson, yet Wolfe was right. Men had killed for less. If Emil Gerber carried a grudge deep enough to light flames in another man's kitchen, I would find it. And if Fritz hid more than pride, that too would surface. The brownstone was a fortress, but someone had breached it. Whether by malice of a rival chef or by some deeper quarrel, I intended to uncover the hand behind the match. Howard Kahn's name surfaced in the morning papers before I had even pulled my second cup of coffee. A gossip column, tucked between stock notes and society weddings, described the portly gourmand declaiming loudly at a midtown restaurant about showing that pompous Wolfe who really understood food. The clipping found its way into my hand, courtesy of Saul Panzer, who had a talent for reading every line that other men skimmed. Saul left it with me at the stoop, cap pulled low, and said only, "Worth passing along," before vanishing into the crowd. I carried the column into Wolfe's office. He sat in his chair, freshly returned from the orchids, brows drawn down as if the air itself had betrayed him. When I read the words aloud, he snorted, "Kahn, that mountebank. He has dined here once and never again." "He claims otherwise," I remarked, holding the clipping. "He claims out of vanity," Wolfe retorted. "The man's palate is as blunt as his manners. He insulted Fritz's consommé, a dish beyond his comprehension. I expelled him. He has brayed ever since." "That braying might have taken on sparks," I said. "He's been promising revenge in public. Arson would give him a story to dine out on." Wolfe closed his eyes, fingers steepled. "Kahn lacks discretion. He could not slip down a service alley without alarming half the block. Still, if he threatens, he must be examined. Go." So I went. Kahn's address was no secret. He liked his name in print. His townhouse on East 56th glowed with lamps despite the daylight, curtains drawn against common stairs. The butler who answered my ring looked me over with suspicion but admitted me once I gave my name. He led me into a parlour crowded with heavy furniture and heavier smells. Cigars, perfume, roast beef lingering from luncheon. Kahn waddled in, a man of girth that rivaled Wolfe's but carried with far less dignity. His face was fleshy, eyes small and restless, mouth already twisted with disdain. "Goodwin," he barked, settling into an armchair that creaked in protest. "What brings Wolfe's errand boy here? To beg forgiveness?" "Not quite," I said. "Your name's been floating, Kahn. Threats, insults, talk of revenge. Then Wolfe's kitchen nearly goes up in smoke. That coincidence looks poor." He laughed, a wet sound. "Smoke in his kitchen? Good. About time that smug parasite learned humility." I studied him. His satisfaction was genuine, yet too eager. "You're admitting pleasure at another man's fire." "Why not? He humiliated me, barred me from his table, made me a joke in circles where taste matters. If his sanctum burns, the gods are just." He leaned forward, jowls quivering. "But do not twist it, Goodwin. I lit no match. I need not sully my hands. His ruin will come without me." "That's a neat denial," I said. "But you've been boasting you'd get even. Witnesses heard it." "Witnesses hear what I wish them to," Kahn snapped. "I will not be accused by you or by Wolfe. If he fears me, let him stew in it." I let the silence draw out, then asked, "Where were you the night of the fire?" He smirked. "At my club, naturally, surrounded by men of standing who will vouch for me. I dined, I drank, I held court until near dawn. Check the registers." His arrogance rang true, but arrogance did not equal innocence. I made a mental note to verify with Saul. Khan dismissed me with a wave, as though concluding a performance. Back at the brownstone, I recounted every word. Wolfe listened with half-lidded eyes, Fritz hovering nearby with stiff shoulders. When I repeated Khan's gloating, Fritz flushed with anger. "That man is swine," Fritz muttered. "To laugh when my kitchen burns. He is capable of worse." "Capable, yes," Wolfe admitted, "but not subtle. Khan lacks stealth. His vanity prefers witnesses. He would set a fire only if reporters stood ready with notebooks." "Still," I pressed, "he named his club as alibi. I can have Saul check the books, interview staff. If he slipped out, we'll know." "Do so," Wolfe ordered. "Until disproved, he remains on our list. Malice is clear, though the hand may be another's." Fritz shook his head, eyes dark. "He hates you, yes. But me, he despises me more. It was I who served the soup, I who heard his insult. He seeks to wound me." "Then he has wounded us both," Wolfe said softly. His gaze shifted to the charred cloth fragment still on the desk. "But this," he continued, "was not Khan's. He would not know how to conceal such a token. No. If he is involved, he acts through others." I filed it away. Khan might lack the agility to creep down alleys, but he had money, pride, and a thirst for spectacle. A man like that could hire subtler hands. The question was whether he had. Wolfe ended the debate by closing his eyes again. "Enough. Confirm his alibi. Then we shall decide if Howard Khan remains a threat or only a braying fool." I rose, pocketing my notebook. Fritz lingered, muttering darkly in Swiss as he retreated toward the wounded kitchen. The brownstone felt heavier with Khan's laughter echoing faint in memory, a reminder that pride can ignite faster than kerosene. I went to the phone to ring Saul. There was work to be done. The morning after Khan's boasting reached Wolfe's desk, I found myself at Brill's Market on 10th Avenue. Fritz had asked me to fetch a particular smoked ham, one that Brill alone supplied, and I knew it was as much excuse as errand. Fritz seldom let provisions leave his sight, but lately he had been tight-lipped and uneasy. If he wanted me among the grocers, I suspected whispers had already reached him. Brill himself, a stout man with arms like hams of his own, greeted me behind the counter. His shop smelled of sawdust, apples, and salt pork, the air thick with the buzz of coolers and the chatter of women counting coins. I ordered the ham, exchanged pleasantries, and let my ear drift. The boy clerk bagging potatoes kept sneaking glances my way, his hands fumbling the scale weights. When I caught his eye, he blushed and bent over his work. After I paid, I lingered near the pickle barrel. The boy finally edged close, voice low. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That's right," I said. "What's on your mind?" He checked that Brill was distracted with a quarrelsome matron, then whispered, "It's about Mr. Brenner's cook, about Mr. Fritz." My back straightened. "Go on." The boy licked his lips nervously. A few days before the fire, a fellow came in, asked me questions. He wanted to know when Mr. Fritz usually shopped, when he went home, if he bought lamb or fish. Then he asked about Mr. Wolfe, what time he took breakfast, how many courses at supper. His eyes darted around, voice dropping further. He wrote things down, said he was making a study, but he weren't no reporter. I studied the boy carefully. His cheeks were flushed, but his eyes held conviction. "Describe him." "Tallish, with a dark coat. Spoke polite, but too smooth. Hair parted sharp. He smoked, and when he paid, he left a matchbook on the counter. I picked it up after he went." The boy pulled a small object from his pocket, worn from fingering, a black matchbook stamped with gold lettering, the Imperial Club. My pulse quickened. The Imperial was Khan's stomping ground. His boasting about Wolfe had already made print, and now one of his companions was fishing for details about our routine. I slid the matchbook into my pocket. "Good work. Don't mention this to anyone else. If the man comes back, note everything. How he stands, what he buys, even the shoes on his feet. Understand?" The boy nodded eagerly. Brill barked his name from across the shop, and he hurried back to the potatoes, leaving me with the ham and a clue burning in my pocket. On the walk home, the city seemed louder, sharper. Streetcars clanged, trucks rattled, and every stranger's glance felt heavier. Someone had been probing our defences, measuring Wolfe's habits as if preparing for siege. It was more than malice. It was reconnaissance. At the brownstone, I carried the ham to the kitchen. Fritz accepted it with a distracted nod, eyes shadowed. I spared him interrogation for the moment and climbed to the office. Wolfe sat with a book, yellow chair cradling him like a throne. His gaze rose as I entered. "Well?" he demanded. I placed the matchbook on his desk. "A grocer's clerk says a stranger questioned him about your meals, Fritz's shopping, every little habit. He left this behind." Wolfe examined the matchbook, thumb running over the embossed letters. "The Imperial Club. Khan again. His vanity stinks from here." I recounted the clerk's description in full. Wolfe listened, face impassive, though I saw the tightening of his jaw. When I finished, he set the matchbook down as though it were evidence in court. "This," he declared, "is deliberate. Not curiosity, not chance gossip. A probe designed to test our rhythm. Khan seeks weakness, or someone in his circle does. To know when Fritz leaves, when I dine, when the house is most exposed. This is preparation for assault." Fritz had entered quietly and now stood near the door. His shoulders sagged. "So it is true," he said softly. "They study me like animal in cage." Wolfe's eyes turned to him. "Not you alone, Fritz. This house. But yes, through you. You are our steward, our guardian of order. To strike at you is to strike at me. That is why they pried." Fritz's face twisted with shame and anger. "I should have spoken sooner. When I felt eyes watching in the street, I thought it nothing. I should have told." "You will tell now," Wolfe said sternly. "Every glance, every whisper. Nothing is trivial when fire has touched our hearth." I leaned forward. "The boy said the man wrote notes. That suggests he's no lunatic. He's careful. He works for someone, and Khan fits too neatly." Wolfe gave a curt nod. "We do not yet know if Khan commands or if another exploits his vanity, but the pattern is plain. The fire was not act of impulse. It was staged after study. We face a calculated enemy." The room fell silent. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent tune, but within the office the air was taut. Wolfe lifted his hand and tapped the matchbook once. "Archie," he said, "this trifle is the key. You will pursue it. Learn who in that club associates with Khan, who has the cunning to plan, not merely bluster. Strip away his circle until the subtle hand remains. Do so swiftly." I pocketed the matchbook again, aware of the weight it carried. Khan might bluster, but someone near him had patience and guile. That man had studied us, charted our weaknesses, and lit fire where it hurt. Wolfe was right. It was a probe, not an end. And probes lead to greater strikes. As I rose, Fritz whispered in Swiss, words I caught only partly, about shame and vengeance. Wolfe silenced him with a glance. "You are not shamed, Fritz. You are wounded. That is different. And wounds can be avenged." The matchbook felt hot in my pocket as I left the room. The brownstone was no fortress if men could measure its heartbeats. But now we knew, and knowing meant we could fight. 2 days later, I found myself back at Brill's Market, not for smoked ham or pickled beets this time, but to see if the nervous clerk had remembered more than he let on. The fire's smell had faded from the brownstone, but Wolfe's patience hadn't sweetened. He wanted details, and I knew where to dig. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in. Brill gave me a nod, but it was the boy I wanted. He looked up from the potato scale, his hands freezing in mid-motion when he recognized me. "Morning," I said, casual as loose change, still thinking about that fellow who asked you all those questions. His Adam's apple bobbed. "I told you what I knew." "Maybe, but sometimes memory sharpens when you think it over." I leaned against the pickle barrel. "How tall was he? Did he limp? Did he smell of tobacco, cologne? Wolfe doesn't like fog. He wants a clear view." The boy bit his lip, then blurted, "He had a way of speaking, too careful, like every word polished. Not American, maybe English, or he wanted you to think so. And his glasses, they flashed under the lights when he looked down at his notes. Thin rims, silver. That's what I remember." Now we were getting somewhere. The first time he'd given me shadows. This time he was sketching the lines of a man. I slid a coin across the counter. "You did fine. Keep sharpening that memory. Next time Wolfe asks, I want a portrait, not a silhouette." He pocketed the coin, nodding quickly. "If he comes back, I'll watch closer." Back at the brownstone, I laid the additions before Wolfe. He listened with eyes half closed, then murmured, "Glasses, a studied manner. Not Khan, he lacks polish. A subordinate, a secretary, the hand that fetches and carries." The Imperial Club matchbook still sat on his desk blotter, its gold lettering glinting under the lamp. Wolfe tapped it once with a finger. "Yes, we are narrowing." Saul Pantzer arrived with his cap pulled low, eyes calm as always, stepping into the brownstone with the air of a man who had seen every trick Manhattan could conjure and kept them all catalogued. I met him at the door and led him straight down to the kitchen. Fritz, though reluctant, allowed the intrusion, standing stiffly by his scarred stove as though guarding a wounded comrade. The room smelled faintly of soap and scorched metal. Every surface bore marks of the fire despite Fritz's scrubbing, blistered enamel, black streaks on the wall, tiles dulled by ash ground into their seams. Saul took it all in with a single sweep of his steady gaze. He removed his cap, crouched beside the stove, and ran a fingertip over the floorboards where the flames had been fiercest. He sniffed, then rubbed thumb against finger thoughtfully. "Not stove grease," he said quietly. "Something poured. You can smell the residue even after soap. This wasn't accident." Fritz muttered a phrase in Swiss that I won't attempt to spell. His pride already bore bruises. Hearing confirmation from Saul cut deeper. "What sort of something?" I asked. "Accelerant," Saul replied. "Kerosene, maybe a blend. Not kitchen stock. Too volatile. Whoever set it knew how to nurse a flame hot enough to spread quick but not so wild it roared up the chimney. Practiced hand. Sabotage, not mischief." I glanced at Fritz. His jaw clenched, eyes hard as he gripped the edge of the counter. "You hear that?" I asked him. "I hear," he said. So it was not my carelessness. His shoulders straightened a little, though pain lingered in his voice. Saul moved to the base of the counter where I had first retrieved the cloth scrap. He carried a small envelope, withdrew the charred fragment I had pocketed days before, and laid it on a tray under the light. "You kept this intact?" he asked. "Best I could," I said. He leaned close, examining the fabric with the patient precision of a jeweller. He moistened one edge, teased apart the threads with a fine pin, then lifted it to the light. His lips curved slightly. "This isn't household rag, not cotton, linen, tight weave, high quality. Look here," he pointed with the pin. "Embroidery, initials." Fritz stepped forward, breath catching. "Mein Gott." I bent closer. Amid the scorch marks, faint but legible, were the letters EG stitched in faded red thread. Saul looked up at me. "Ring any bells?" "It does," I said slowly. "Emil Gerber, Swiss, runs a restaurant on 8th. Fritz's old rival." Fritz's face drained of colour. His hands trembled as he reached for the counter behind him. "Emil," he whispered. "So he stoops to this." Saul slid the fragment back into its envelope. "A waiter's napkin, most likely. See the size, the hem. Restaurants monogram their linens. This one belonged to him or his house." The room grew heavy with silence. Fritz stared at the blackened stove, as though he saw not fire scars but betrayal. Saul tucked the envelope into his pocket and straightened. I escorted him upstairs where Wolfe waited in the office. Wolfe had been in his chair since breakfast, a globe of beer at his elbow, motionless save for the tapping of a finger against the armrest. When Saul entered, Wolfe inclined his head, the barest acknowledgement reserved for his most trusted operative. "Well?" Wolfe asked. Saul removed the envelope, set it on Wolfe's desk blotter, and spoke without embellishment. "Accelerant used. Kerosene blend, not grease. Applied by practiced hand. This cloth fragment is a waiter's napkin, linen, embroidered with initials EG, belongs to Emil Gerber's establishment." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, lids heavy as stone. He touched the envelope with one finger but did not open it. "You are certain?" "As certain as I ever am," Saul said. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with deliberate slowness. "So, Gerber, his rivalry with Fritz passes from insult to assault." Fritz had followed us silently and now stood by the office door, face ashen. "He would dare," he demanded. "He would burn my kitchen to ash to shame me." Wolfe's voice was soft but heavy. "It seems so." He turned his gaze on Fritz. "This is no longer wounded pride. This is war declared. Archie, Saul, you will press this matter. Learn what Gerber gains from this outrage. Pride alone does not drive a man to felony. I nodded, though my thoughts ran quick. Emil Gerber had always struck me as loud but not reckless. To risk arson against Wolfe's house seemed beyond even swollen pride, yet the cloth was damning. Fritz shook his head violently. He hated me, yes. He mocked me. But to strike so, I cannot believe. You must, Wolfe said sternly. Facts do not wait for belief. The cloth speaks, the accelerant speaks, and I will not have my household violated without answer. Archie, tomorrow you will dine at Gerber's. Observe, inquire. Saul, assist him discreetly. We will confront truth with evidence, not sentiment. The meeting ended with that decree. Saul replaced his cap and slipped out, silent as always, leaving behind the envelope that now seemed to weigh the room like a stone. Fritz stood motionless, torn between fury and disbelief. Wolfe lifted his beer, drained it slowly, and set the glass down with finality. "This house has been tested," he said, his voice low. "We shall respond in kind." The restaurant glowed with warm lamplight, brass fixtures polished to a mirror's edge, the kind of establishment where every tablecloth was starched and the maitre d' bowed as if royalty had arrived. Emil Gerber's name gleamed in gold script on the frosted windows. I entered on Wolfe's instructions, a patron among patrons, though my business was closer to reconnaissance than appetite. A waiter in crisp white jacket led me past crowded tables to a corner booth. The murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware rose around me like an orchestra tuned to civility. Gerber himself emerged from the kitchen as though drawn by instinct. He spotted me before the waiter had withdrawn. His heavy face tightened, eyes narrowing with recognition. He approached with deliberate steps, wiping hands on a linen napkin. "Goodwin," he said stiffly, his Swiss accent sharp. "Nero Wolfe sends his dog to my door." I smiled easily. Wolfe doesn't keep dogs. He keeps me. Tonight, I'm a paying guest. He looked as if he'd rather toss me into the gutter, but civility bound him. "You will eat, then, and you will see that my house does not burn itself." He snapped at the waiter in German. Menus were unnecessary. A meal was imposed upon me. Plates began to arrive with military precision. First, a consommé clear as amber, scented with herbs, then trout in butter that flaked under the fork, followed by roast pheasant with a sauce delicate enough to make Fritz raise an eyebrow if he'd tasted it. Each dish was flawless, Gerber's skill undeniable, but taste could not dissolve the tension. Gerber lingered near the dining room entrance, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me as though daring me to find fault. I let the food speak for itself, noting instead the details Wolfe would want. Waiters moved with practiced grace, napkins folded on each table, linen embroidered in red thread. I reached for mine deliberately, turned the hem under the lamplight. The initials were clear, E.G., the same as the charred scraps Saul had analysed. Every diner used them. They were Gerber's signature. I folded it slowly and laid it across my knee, filing the fact away. When the final course had been cleared, Gerber approached. His smile was brittle as sugar glass. "So, Goodwin, you have eaten. What is your verdict? Do you carry compliments back to your master?" "Compliments?" I leaned back. "The food's good, no denying it, but I'm here on other business." I drew the napkin from my knee, held it up so the red stitching caught the light. "This looks familiar. We found one like it after a fire in Fritz's kitchen." The colour drained from Gerber's cheeks, replaced by a blotchy red. He snatched the napkin from my hand, voice rising. "You accuse me? That I sneak like a thief to his house? That I burn like a criminal?" Diners turned to stare. His chest heaved, his hands gripped the linen as if he would tear it. "Easy," I said. "I'm only pointing out coincidence. Your linen shows up where it doesn't belong. Wolfe thinks it speaks loudly." He slammed the napkin onto the table. "Coincidence? My napkins are everywhere. Launderers mix, staff trade, who can say? I do not crawl in alleys to ruin rivals. If Fritz spreads such lies, he is jealous, nothing more." His vehemence rang too sharp, too prepared. I watched him carefully. "You two have history. Fought over recipes, words exchanged, you mocked him publicly." "I mocked him because he deserves it," Gerber snapped. "He holds himself as saint of the kitchen, keeper of sacred secrets. He is nothing but servant to Wolfe's appetite, and now he cries fire and blames me. No, I will not bear it. The room was hushed, diners whispering behind menus. I kept my voice low. Then you deny it flat. You didn't set foot near our house that night. I deny, he spat. I was here, in my kitchen, with my staff. They will say so. Ask them. Ask the whole street. I did not go. His defensiveness was a shield, but not perfect. His eyes flickered when I mentioned the fire, a flash of something between fear and guilt. Whether he feared the accusation or the truth behind it, I couldn't yet say. I stood, tossed money on the table, and slid into my coat. I'll carry your denial to Wolfe, I said evenly. But understand, he doesn't mistake smoke for fog. If you're hiding, he'll see through it. Gerber's fists clenched at his sides. Tell him this, he said, voice shaking. If he wants war, he shall have it. But I did not light his fire. I left the restaurant under the weight of eyes, the embroidered napkins etched in memory. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, neon signs flickering to life. The meal had been flawless, yes, but beneath the perfection lay nerves frayed raw, a man too quick to defend, too angry to sound innocent. Wolfe would know how to read that music. The night air was sharp when I left Gerber's dining room, sharper still after his denials. He had shaken with fury at the thought of accusation, his voice too high, his hands clutching linen as though he meant to strangle me with it. I filed it away for Wolfe, but my instincts itched. A man that angry seldom calmed so quickly. I walked a block, then circled back along the alley that serviced the restaurant. Trash cans lined the brick walls, and a narrow light shone through the rear door. I paused, listening. From inside came a thud, then silence, then the faintest scrape of chair legs against tile. Something was wrong. I moved closer. The door was unlatched, and curiosity won. Inside, the kitchen still smelled of roasted pheasant and butter, but another odour lingered beneath. Something metallic, like spilled pennies. I stepped carefully past stacked pots, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Near the butcher's block lay a figure sprawled awkwardly, arms bent beneath his weight. Emil Gerber, face swollen, lips dark, a linen napkin knotted tight around his throat. His own initials, E.G., glared red in the embroidery against his white skin. For a moment I stood still, the sight sinking in. Gerber's chest did not rise. The room was silent but for the hiss of a cooling pan. Then voices rose in the dining room beyond, chairs scraping, waiters calling in alarm. Someone else had found him too. I straightened, stepped back from the body. This was no longer a matter of arson. Murder had entered the stage. The door burst open and uniforms crowded in, revolvers drawn. Behind them came Inspector Kramer, his cigar clamped between teeth though unlit, his coat hanging open as if he had been dragged from supper. He took one look at the body, then another at me and let out a growl that could curdle milk. "Goodwin! Of course you're here. Wherever there's a corpse, you're sniffing around." "Nice to see you too, Inspector," I said mildly. "Gerber's not taking reservations anymore." Kramer shoved past, crouched over the body and swore, strangled, with his own napkin. He yanked it loose, waving the embroidered corner. "E.G. couldn't be clearer. And you, what the hell are you doing here?" "I dined," I told him, paid my bill, walked out, heard a noise, came back, found him like this. "You expect me to swallow that?" he barked. "Wolfe sends you here to rattle him, and now the man's dead. Looks to me like Wolfe's blasted theories pushed too far." I kept my voice steady. "Wolfe doesn't strangle chefs in their own kitchens, Inspector. He's more likely to lecture them into submission." Kramer stood, jabbing a finger at me. "Don't be clever. This stinks of Wolfe's meddling. First a fire in his house, now a rival chef throttled, and you, his errand boy, right in the middle. You tell Wolfe I won't carry water for him this time." I shrugged. "Tell him yourself. He'll be expecting you." Uniforms moved around, photographing the body, gathering statements. Diners had been ushered out, leaving the restaurant heavy with silence. I gave my name, address, and the official story. I'd come for dinner, nothing more. Kramer glared but let me go, though I knew he would be pounding on the brownstone before dawn. I returned home, the city's clatter seeming muted against the weight of Gerber's face in my memory. Wolfe was still in his chair, book closed, beer at hand. He looked up as I entered. "Well?" he asked. "He's dead," I said flatly. Kitchen floor, napkin knotted round his neck, one of his own, embroidered. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "So, The contest advances. Kramer's convinced you shoved me into it, I added. He'll be here soon with accusations. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. Kramer believes the sun rises to annoy him. Let him come. What matters is this. Arson was prelude. Murder is declaration. Someone has turned Gerber's enmity into a weapon, and by choosing his own linen, they gesture toward Fritz. Fritz had entered quietly, pale under the lamplight. At Wolfe's words, he staggered. They mean to frame me, he whispered. First my kitchen, now his death. All blame will point here. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. Which means we must point it back where it belongs. Archie, tomorrow you will trace every witness who saw Gerber tonight. Learn who left, who lingered. Somewhere among them stands the hand that tied that knot. I nodded, though the image of Gerber's bulging eyes stayed sharp. Someone had tightened that napkin with deliberate strength, and in doing so had dragged us from smoke into blood. Wolfe's citadel was under siege, and Fritz stood in the crosshairs. The doorbell clanged with the kind of urgency that told me to brace myself. I opened, and there was Inspector Kramer in full roar, hat jammed low, cigar bitten so hard it looked ready to splinter. He barged past me without waiting, his overcoat flapping like a banner of war. He stormed into Wolfe's office, where Wolfe sat composed in his yellow chair, a book closed neatly beside him. Fritz had been laying out glasses on the side table, and at the sight of Kramer's entrance he froze, colour draining from his face. Kramer slapped a folded sheet on Wolfe's desk, jabbing it with his forefinger. Explain that. Your chef was seen at Gerber's place 2 nights before the man turned up dead. Witnesses, solid ones. You want to tell me again how Fritz is nothing but a bystander? Fritz's lips parted, then shut, his hands trembling. Wolfe's eyes flicked once at the paper, then up at Kramer, unblinking. Fritz, he said, voice steady. Tell him. Fritz's breath rattled. Yes, I went. I did not harm him. I wished for peace. Kramer barked a laugh that held no humour. Peace? You expect me to buy that? You fight like cats for years. His linen ends up in your stove, and now you admit visiting him right before he's strangled. Don't make me laugh. Fritz's shoulders sagged. His accent thickened. I asked him to stop, to end the quarrel. I said it was foolish, 2 countrymen fighting like schoolboys. I begged him, that is all. Kramer rounded on Wolfe. There's your loyal servant. Went begging to his enemy. And when it didn't work, maybe he used stronger argument. I've got a dead man and a motive you could drive a truck through. Wolfe's tone was iron. You have nothing but circumstance and supposition. Fritz's visit proves only his decency. You will not malign him in my house. Kramer's eyes blazed. Decency? He hides it until I dig it out. He admits it only when I throw evidence in his face. That's not decency. That's concealment. I stepped in before the air combusted. Hold on, Inspector. If Fritz wanted Gerber dead, would he really strangle him with a monogram napkin that points straight back here? That's too loud, even for amateurs. Kramer swung toward me. You keep your mouth shut, Goodwin. This smells to high heaven and you're knee-deep in it. If it were anyone else's chef, I'd have him in custody already. Fritz swayed where he stood, as though the words themselves struck him. Arrest me if you must, he said hoarsely. But I did not kill him. I went as man to man, asking for truce. He laughed. He mocked. I came home ashamed. His eyes shifted to Wolfe. And now it will destroy us. Wolfe's great head lifted, his gaze firm. No, Fritz, it will not. I will not permit it. Kramer jammed the cigar back in his teeth, growling through clenched jaw. Don't tell me what you'll permit. The district attorney won't care about your household loyalties. He'll see a cook with a feud and a dead rival, and that's enough for him. So you better dig fast, Wolfe, because my patience is burned out. He snatched the paper from the desk and stomped out, the door shuddering behind him. Silence spread through the room like smoke. Fritz leaned against the sideboard, face grey, hands clutching the wood as if for anchor. I studied him. His spirit, usually as solid as the meals he built, looked cracked. He whispered in Swiss, words I didn't catch, then spoke clearer. I should not have gone. Now they will say I am vengeful. They will make me villain. Wolfe reached for his glass of beer, lifted it with deliberate calm. Fritz, he said gravely, you are my ally, my friend, my provider of sustenance and order. They may attempt to break you. They will fail. I will not abandon you. Fritz closed his eyes, but the reassurance did not mend him. I saw in the slump of his shoulders a man shaken, fearing not only the law's suspicion but the possibility of dragging Wolfe down with him. Wolfe drained the glass, set it aside, and fixed me with a stare. "Archie, see that Fritz understands. He must not falter. His steadiness is essential. Our enemy counts on division. We will not provide it." I nodded, though my chest tightened at Fritz's pale face. Kramer's evidence had struck home, and no words could erase it. Fritz had gone to Gerber, and Gerber was dead. Wolfe's assurance held weight, but the shadows of suspicion had already entered, and they gnawed at Fritz's spirit like moths in cloth. The Imperial Club was the kind of place where velvet drapes muted conversation and waiters walked with the solemnity of priests. I went there under Wolfe's instructions, not to eat, but to prod. Howard Kahn held court in the lounge, glass in hand, surrounded by companions who laughed too loudly at his remarks. He spotted me immediately, his fleshy face tightening. "Goodwin," he sneered, voice carrying across the polished floor. "Does Wolfe send his hound to fetch gossip?" "I came to hear your alibi firsthand," I said. "The night of the fire you claim you were here. Dined, drank, held court. That's the story." Kahn smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Not a story. Fact. This club is my second home. Ask any of these gentlemen." His companions nodded dutifully. I filed away their rehearsed eagerness. The truth seldom needs chorus. "Funny," I said, "because Saul Panzer checked your register. Your signature fades before midnight. After that, no Kahn until dawn." The smirk faltered. "Registers mean nothing." I stepped out briefly. A cigar, a stroll. "Does Wolfe build accusations from evening walks?" "Depends where that walk leads," I said. "Maybe down 10th Avenue, past a certain market, where a stranger asked a clerk about Wolfe's habits. The clerk remembers the man carried one of these." I set the matchbook on the table, gold letters shining under the lamp. Kahn's hand twitched toward it, then withdrew. "That proves nothing. Half the city carries those. A matchbook is not a rope around the neck." "No," I agreed. "But the stranger wasn't half the city. He was one of your companions. The boy described him clear. Tall, neat part, coat too fine for groceries. That fits Mr. Dyer, sitting right there." I nodded at a man on Kahn's right. Dyer flushed, stammered. Kahn barked, "Quiet." But too late. The silence in the lounge weighed heavy. Kahn's voice hardened. "If one of my friends spoke out of turn, that is not my concern. I did not torch Wolfe's kitchen." "Maybe not with your own hands," I said evenly. "But you wanted revenge. You were humiliated at Wolfe's table and you bragged you'd answer it. Gerber's feud gave you cover. A little fire, well placed, makes Fritz look careless, maybe even malicious. You get your revenge without lifting a match." Kahn surged forward, face purple. "You dare accuse me of conspiracy? I'm a patron of the arts, a gentleman of taste." "A gentleman of taste doesn't slip from his club without logging out," I cut in, "doesn't send cronies fishing for meal schedules, and doesn't bray revenge in public unless he means to chase it." For a moment, only his wheezing filled the air. Then he sank back, glaring. "Gerber is dead. Blame him if you wish. I owe you no explanations." Later, in Wolfe's office, I laid out the whole exchange. Saul sat nearby, cap in his lap, expression calm. Wolfe listened with eyes half closed, fingers steepled. When I finished, he spoke with measured weight. "Kahn orchestrated the fire," Wolfe said. "He used Gerber's rivalry as mask, sending an agent to map our habits. The accelerant, the napkin, these are theatre designed to disgrace Fritz. Kahn lacks subtlety, but he has vanity enough to commission such insult." "And Gerber's death?" I asked. "That," Wolfe replied, "is discord in the plan. Kahn sought humiliation, not murder." Another hand intruded, silencing Gerber to muddy waters. Kahn's lies expose him, but he is not alone. Somewhere within his circle stands the true murderer. Fritz shifted by the sideboard, face pale, but intent. Wolfe raised a hand toward him. "Take heart. The snare was meant for you, but it has caught Kahn instead. We will turn his vanity against him." I pocketed the matchbook again, feeling its weight. The fire's author was unmasked, but Gerber's strangling remained. Wolfe's eyes gleamed under the lamplight. The game had deepened, and the board was not yet clear. The brownstone had the stillness of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, vast and immovable, hands steepled against his middle. His eyes were closed, but the set of his jaw told me he was alert and calculating. The red chairs stood ready across from him, polished like instruments of interrogation. The lamp on the desk was angled just so, throwing light onto the blotter while shadows deepened the corners of the room. Fritz had drawn the curtains tight. Not a wisp of outside light intruded. At 7:30 sharp, the first knock came. I answered, letting in Inspector Kramer, who chewed his cigar with visible irritation. "Damn circus," he muttered, brushing past me. He looked around the office as though expecting animals in cages. "If you think I've got patience for another of your stage performances, Wolfe." "You are here," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. "That is sufficient." Kramer grunted, dropped into one of the red chairs and crossed his arms. I'd seen him more relaxed in a morgue. The second knock produced Howard Kahn and his secretary. Kahn waddled in like a baron entering his hall, his vest buttons straining, cheeks flushed with self-importance. The secretary trailed behind, tall and narrow, spectacles flashing under the lamplight, his face drawn tight as if permanently braced for insult. Fritz admitted them with stiff courtesy and retreated to the sideboard, silent as stone. Kahn puffed out his chest and gave Wolfe a mock bow. "So, the great detective convenes his council. I trust supper will be served after this charade." Wolfe opened his eyes at last. "If you expect sustenance, Mr. Kahn, you are mistaken. You will receive words. Whether you choke on them is your affair." Kahn snorted and settled heavily into a chair. The secretary chose the farthest one, hands clasped too neatly in his lap. I caught the flick of his eyes toward Kahn, deference sharpened by something colder. More footsteps, and Saul Panzer entered without fanfare, nodding to Wolfe before taking a place against the wall. If Saul was present, the foundation had been checked twice and nailed down thrice. Wolfe left nothing to chance tonight. When all were seated, Wolfe drew a breath and spoke. His voice was calm, deliberate, each word falling like a stone into water. "You are assembled because events have trespassed upon my household. A fire set in my kitchen, followed by the murder of Emil Gerber, compels explanation. The police, represented by Inspector Kramer, pursue their course. I, however, pursue mine. Tonight, we will distinguish fact from vanity, guilt from bluster." Kahn laughed too loudly. "Fact? You've no fact, only suspicion. You'd like to paint me as villain because your cook once slighted me. Absurd." Wolfe raised a hand, silencing him. "Your vanity, Mr. Kahn, is undisputed. When you were expelled from my table for discourtesy, you raged like a child denied sweets. You boasted you would have your revenge. You found means. The fire in Fritz's kitchen was your instrument." Kahn shot upright, face mottled. "Lies. I was at my club that night. Dozens saw me." Saul spoke for the first time. "They saw you until midnight. After that, no one. Your secretary signed you back in at dawn." He held up a small book, a copy of the Imperial Club's register, with Kahn's name penned twice in different hands. Kramer leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You had that checked, Panzer?" "Thoroughly," Saul said. Kahn sputtered. "A technicality. I stepped out, yes, for air. That proves nothing." "It proves opportunity," Wolfe replied. "And your secretary's complicity. He forged your presence to conceal absence. Meanwhile, a grocer's clerk was questioned about my household. Meals, hours, habits. The Inquisitor matched your secretary precisely." All eyes swung to the secretary. He sat rigid, jaw tight. "I acted on instruction," he said evenly. "Mr. Kahn wished information. I gathered it. That is all." Wolfe's gaze deepened, heavy as iron. "No, that is not all. You studied my routines to time an assault. Kerosene was poured in Fritz's kitchen, placed with skill. A scrap of linen, embroidered with Gerber's initials, was left behind. You sought to disgrace Fritz, to mask Kahn's revenge with Gerber's quarrel. But Gerber's death was not Kahn's doing. It was yours." The secretary's hands twitched, then stilled. Kahn gaped at him, confusion spreading across his florid face. "My secretary? Preposterous. He is loyal beyond question." "Devotion breeds resentment when chained too long," Wolfe said. For years he has endured your insults, your posturing. He carried your burdens, suffered your slights. When you sent him to orchestrate mischief, he saw chance to end humiliation. He killed Gerber, not for you, but for himself. By strangling him with his own napkin, he forced suspicion upon Fritz, upon you, upon anyone but himself. It was cunning, but not cunning enough. Kramer barked, You've got gall, Wolfe. You're accusing the secretary of murder on words alone? Not words, Wolfe said. Facts. Saul, tell him. Saul unfolded a slip of paper. The laundress who services Gerber's restaurant reported a missing bundle. Napkins embroidered E.G., the very week of the fire. A man collected them, claiming to be staff. She described spectacles, tall frame, neat coat. Matches the secretary. She swore to it when shown his photograph. The secretary flinched, colour draining. He gripped the chair arms, knuckles white. Wolfe leaned forward, voice soft but inexorable. You murdered Gerber because his quarrel with Fritz offered cover. His arrogance made him easy prey. You tightened the napkin with hands long trained to restraint, but the knot betrayed you. A servant's knot, precise, efficient, not the clumsy violence of rage. You framed Fritz, then Khan, thinking suspicion would circle endlessly. But it ends with you. The secretary sprang up, voice cracking. Enough! You sit there in your chair and think you know everything. Kramer grabbed his arm, yanking him back down. Sit, damn you. You'll have your say at headquarters. Khan wheezed, staring at his secretary with dawning horror. You, after all I gave? The secretary turned on him with sudden venom. All you gave? You gave nothing but scorn. Years of insults, years of carrying your shame while you wallowed. I burned for it. I choked Gerber with his own pomp, and I would have let them blame Fritz, blame you, blame anyone but me. You deserved ruin. His chest heaved. The room rang with his confession. Fritz shuddered, face pale. Kramer snapped handcuffs onto the secretary's wrists, grim satisfaction on his face. Wolfe exhaled, sinking back. Inspector, there is your murderer. Take him. Kramer tugged the secretary to his feet. Gladly. For once, Wolfe, you've spared me the trouble. Come along. The man was dragged toward the door, spitting words in Swiss, curses aimed at both master and world. Khan sat collapsed, staring at the carpet, his arrogance crumbling into fear. Wolfe closed his eyes again, weary but triumphant. Archie, beer. I poured from the sideboard, the hiss of liquid steadying the air. The trap had sprung. Justice, in Wolfe's style, had been served from the yellow chair. The door closed hard behind Kramer, his prisoner in tow, and the echo lingered in the silence. The office had not emptied, however. Khan still sat hunched in the red chair, his massive hands spread on his knees as though steadying a body too heavy for its own shame. His waistcoat strained with each wheezing breath. The bravado was gone. He looked like a man who had eaten past appetite and found the meal poisoned. Wolfe reached for his glass. Fritz, moving automatically, filled it with chilled beer, the pale foam rising neatly. Wolfe took a long draught, set it down, and regarded Khan with hooded eyes. You are not the murderer, he said, but you are culpable. Without your vanity, your hunger for petty vengeance, no fire would have been set, no opportunity seized. You employed your secretary to fetch you revenge. He fetched instead his liberation. Khan raised his head, face blotched. I never ordered murder. No, Wolfe agreed. You ordered humiliation. That is your crime. You made yourself instrument and shield for a man whose patience had frayed to blood. You will answer for conspiracy to arson, at minimum. Whether the district attorney shows mercy depends on how loudly you confess. Khan sagged further, muttering incoherently. I doubted mercy would be forthcoming. He was a man who had wasted every ounce of goodwill long before tonight. Saul shifted against the wall, his expression as mild as ever, but I saw the satisfaction in his eyes. He had laid the foundation for Wolfe's deduction stone by stone, until no escape remained. I jotted notes, cataloguing Khan's collapse for the record. Fritz, meanwhile, stood rigid by the sideboard. His dignity had been battered these last days, but now, as the truth settled, I saw his spine straighten. He looked at Wolfe, and the weight of gratitude in that glance was heavy. Wolfe inclined his head slightly, acknowledging without sentiment. Archie, Wolfe said, breaking the silence, summon Inspector Kramer back when he has secured the prisoner. Khan must go as well. I prefer not to house him longer than required. I nodded, went to the hall, and found Kramer already returning, cigar finally lit, smoke trailing like banners of victory. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. He's in the wagon, screaming his head off. So, Wolfe, another performance and another collar. I'll give you that. Do so, Wolfe said dryly, and remove Mr. Khan with you. Khan groaned as Kramer hauled him to his feet. For a moment, the gourmand tried to recover bluster. This is injustice. Shut it, Kramer snapped. Save your lungs for the DA. He steered Khan out, the man's protests fading down the corridor. At last, the office was ours again. Wolfe, Fritz, Saul, and me. The lamplight seemed warmer without hostility pressing against it. Wolfe sighed, leaned back in his chair, and shut his eyes. It is concluded, he said. Almost, I answered. There's still the matter of Fritz's name, inspector's paperwork, the newspapers. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. The press will print nonsense regardless. What matters is that Fritz is exonerated. He opened his eyes, fixing them on our chef. You are cleared, Fritz. You will hold your head high. Your honour stands. Fritz's voice trembled. I thank you, Herr Wolfe. These days have been... He faltered, hands knotting at his apron. I feared it would ruin you, and me with you. Wolfe's tone softened, rare as spring. Your loyalty has never been in question. Others may falter. You do not. That is why you serve at my table and no other. Fritz bowed his head, overcome. He slipped out, retreating to the sanctity of his kitchen, his temple restored. Saul set his cap on his head, ready to leave. Call if you need me further, he said. Wolfe inclined his head in dismissal, and Saul vanished into the night as silently as he had entered. The room shrank back to its familiar proportions, Wolfe in his chair, me by the desk. The tension had dissolved, leaving only the smell of cigar smoke and the faint hiss of the radiator. I closed my notebook. That was neat, Wolfe, but I'll say one thing. The secretary had fire in him. Years of swallowing Khan's insults. Then one night he decides to serve his own dish cold. Almost admirable, if it weren't murder. Wolfe snorted. There is no admiration in betrayal. He lacked the courage to confront, so he embraced subterfuge. Murder is never admirable, Archie. It is merely the last refuge of small men who believe themselves large. True enough, I said. But I'll hand it to you. You sprang that trap like a spider. Khan thought he'd bought himself cover. The secretary thought he'd spun a masterpiece, and you unravelled them both with a few words. Not words, Wolfe said, eyes closing again. Facts. Facts, Archie. Words adorn them, but facts sustain them. The office settled into quiet. The clock ticked, marking the passage from chaos to order. The trap had been sprung, the prey netted, the household safe again. I thought of Fritz below, scrubbing his pots with renewed vigour, relieved that his name was clean. I thought of Gerber, proud and foolish, silenced by a servant's hands. I thought of Khan, his vanity collapsed into shame. And above all, I thought of Wolfe, immovable in his chair, dispensing judgment with the precision of a surgeon. The city outside might roar with traffic, clubs might glitter with chandeliers, men might plot vengeance in shadows. But here, in this room, Wolfe had restored balance. He opened his eyes one final time. Archie, dinner. I will not have the evening wasted further. I grinned. Coming right up. And so the brownstone returned to its rhythm. Beer at Wolfe's elbow, order re-established, the world outside kept at bay by reason and deduction. The case was closed. Kramer returned to the brownstone the following afternoon, his presence heralded by the familiar thunder of the doorbell and the scrape of his shoes on the front steps. Fritz would not answer. It was never Fritz, so I went. The inspector stood on the stoop with his cigar already working furiously, smoke curling about his face like a storm cloud. His coat collar was turned up, and his eyes carried the look of a man who had been through arguments since breakfast. Goodwin, he barked, brushing past me as though the hallway belonged to him. Is he in? In up and anchored, I said. As usual. Kramer grunted, stomped to the office door, and pushed it open without knocking. Inside, Wolfe sat enthroned in the yellow chair, a book laid face down on the desk beside him. The orchids upstairs had been given their allotted hours. and Wolfe now presided over his sanctum with the serenity of a monarch who had successfully repelled invaders. Fritz was in the background, dusting shelves with meticulous precision, though the quick glance he gave the inspector betrayed lingering unease. Kramer dropped into a red chair with the air of a man accepting defeat with poor grace. He bit hard on the cigar. "All right, Wolfe, you were right." Wolfe raised his brows. "About which particular?" "The secretary," Kramer growled. "We put the screws to him all night. He spilled the whole bucket. He lit your kitchen fire under Khan's orders, then went off script and throttled Gerber. Khan's alibi was cooked, as you said. I've got enough to hang one and cage the other." "Excellent," Wolfe murmured. He reached for his glass of beer, lifted it with both hands and drank deeply before setting it back on the coaster. "You may congratulate yourself, Inspector. The city is safer for your diligence." Kramer nearly choked on his cigar smoke. "Diligence? Hell, Wolfe, I spent half my time cleaning up after your grand speeches. If you'd walked into headquarters with that performance, you'd have had reporters hanging from the ceiling." "Fortunately," Wolfe said, "I do not perform at headquarters." I caught the twitch of Fritz's mouth, half smile, half exhaustion. The last days had etched lines under his eyes. He had been cleared, yes, but suspicion leaves stains, and Fritz was a man whose pride was as polished as his copper pots. Kramer jabbed the cigar toward him. "Your chef's lucky. I had him pegged. Every scrap pointed his way until Wolfe started winding ropes. He'd better thank his stars." Fritz straightened, his voice quiet but firm. "I thank Herr Wolfe. For him, I keep my honor." Wolfe inclined his head. "It is not honor that required defense, Fritz, but truth. You are indispensable. That suffices." Kramer snorted. "Indispensable cook. I'll be damned." He shoved himself upright, pacing before the desk. "Anyway, the press will get wind of Khan's vanity, the secretary's grudge, and your damn kitchen. You'll see column after column about the fire in the Wolfe den." Wolfe's lips pressed thin. "Phooey! The public appetite for melodrama is insatiable. Let them gorge." Kramer wagged a finger. "Don't phooey me. You might like hiding in this brownstone, but out there people think you staged the whole thing to show up the police." "Then out there," Wolfe replied, "they are fools." I stepped in, partly to ease tension, partly because Fritz's hand on the cloth showed strain. "Inspector, if you're through with the compliments, we'll escort you out." Kramer glared, puffed a cloud of smoke, then jammed the cigar back between his teeth. "Don't get smart, Goodwin. I said my piece." He turned back to Wolfe. "I'll admit it. Your trap worked. You cracked them. But one day, Wolfe, your tricks will backfire. Then we'll see how calm you sit in that chair." Wolfe closed his eyes. "I shall risk it." Kramer stomped to the door. Before leaving, he threw one last glance toward Fritz. "Keep your nose clean, chef. Not everyone gets rescued by a fat genius." Then he was gone, his heavy steps rattling the hallway floorboards. The office breathed easier once the sound faded. Fritz set aside the cloth, his shoulders slumping. He turned toward Wolfe, voice low. "I will scrub the kitchen again, though it is clean. The smell of smoke lingers, but I will drive it out." "You will," Wolfe said, eyes still closed. "I require it restored at once. My meals will not be delayed further." "Yes, Herr Wolfe." Fritz bowed his head, the humility edged with renewed pride. He had been vindicated, and his domain would be whole again. He left the office with the stride of a man returning to a battlefield already won. I leaned against the desk, studying Wolfe. "You might try a kind word once in a while. The man nearly had his life ruined." "I gave him truth," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. "Truth is better than kind words. Kind words fade. Truth endures." "Maybe so," I admitted. "But cooks are human, even Swiss cooks." Wolfe ignored me, lifting his glass for another slow sip. The silence stretched, filled only by the tick of the clock and the distant clatter of pots below. I looked around the office, the globe by the wall, the neat stacks of books, the smell of leather and polish. The place was untouched, secure, as though the fire had never threatened it. Yet I remembered the smoke in the hallway, Fritz's shout, the sight of flames licking where no flame should ever be. The brownstone had nearly been scarred. That thought stayed with me as I closed the windows against the late light. Wolfe's chair gleamed in lamplight, immovable, serene. He had defended his fortress with nothing more than logic and disdain, and it had worked again. But I knew how close it had come. Evening fell without drama. The lamps glowed, supper was served at 8 precisely, and Fritz, though drawn, carried each course with ceremonial dignity. He would not let fatigue mar his service. Wolfe attended the table with unhurried appetite, consuming trout with dill, roasted fowl, and a custard Fritz had prepared as though to erase all trace of humiliation. I watched the chef from my seat. His movements had steadied. The tremor of doubt that had haunted him was gone. In its place was something sterner, the resilience of a man who had been tested and survived. Fritz's kitchen had been fouled, his loyalty questioned, but he had endured. After dinner, Wolfe repaired to the office as always. The yellow chair received him like a throne, the ottoman raised to meet his feet. He reached for his beer, its glass frosted, and sipped with audible satisfaction. The crisis had been banished, and the machinery of his household ticked once more with clockwork precision. I leaned against the desk, notebook open, though there was little left to record. "Funny thing," I said. "The brownstone looks unchanged. Curtains neat, books in order, the same orchids upstairs, yet I can still smell smoke if I think about it." "That is memory," Wolfe murmured. "The air is clean." "Maybe, but I don't forget the sight of Fritz yelling, fire climbing up the stove. For a minute I thought the whole place would go." Wolfe frowned, his eyes still closed. "It did not, and it will not. This house is secure. It endures because I endure." I smiled wryly. "You're durable, I'll give you that. But even fortresses burn when someone pours kerosene." He opened one eye. "Not while I'm here." That was Wolfe, serene in certainty, anchored to his chair as though the world outside could never breach it. And maybe he was right. The fire had threatened, the plot had tangled, but the brownstone stood intact, defended by Wolfe's mind as firmly as by bricks and mortar. Fritz entered briefly to clear the empty glasses. He moved with brisk confidence, the fatigue of the last days washing off like soot from a polished pan. As he gathered the trays, he paused. "Herr Wolfe, tomorrow the kitchen will be as new. I will not sleep until it is finished." "You will sleep," Wolfe corrected. "Exhaustion breeds error, but you will restore the kitchen, and swiftly. The routine is absolute." Fritz nodded, eyes shining with determination, and departed again. I closed my notebook. "So, that's it. Fires, murders, grudges, all tied up with a neat knot. You've defended the brownstone again. I hope the universe appreciates it." "The universe," Wolfe said, "is indifferent, but I am not. My household is inviolate." He drained his glass, the gesture final. Outside, the city thrummed with traffic, neon glowing in the night. But here, inside the sealed brownstone, peace had returned. The orchids would bloom, Fritz would cook, I would chase down leads, and Wolfe would sit, unshaken in his chair. I thought again of the flames in the kitchen, the peril so near. It had brushed us, singed pride and nerves, but it had not consumed. Wolfe had defended his sanctuary with relentless clarity, and the house, like the man, had endured, and so order was restored, quiet, steady, and absolute.